Imagine waking up one day to find that someone you thought you knew, a successful businessman, a family man, vanished without a trace, only to return days later with a story straight out of a spy thriller. He's been kidnapped, tortured, and silenced by forces too powerful to name. But before you can even wrap your head around that, he disappears again, this time for good. His body is found in the desert, shot in the back of the head with his own gun, surrounded by cryptic notes and mysterious clues. Now, the real question is, what was Charles Morgan involved in that led to such a bizarre and terrifying end? This isn't just another unsolved murder. This is a web of secrets, a tale of conspiracy, organized crime, and perhaps something much bigger, something hidden just beneath the surface of everyday life. Charles Morgan's death is a story that challenges everything we think we know about crime and cover ups. And today we're diving into this chilling case, peeling back each layer of the mystery to uncover the truth. Was he a man caught in a dangerous game, or was he silenced for knowing too much? Before the mystery unfolded, Charles Morgan seemed like an ordinary, successful man living a comfortable life in Tucson, Arizona. He was a real estate investor, someone who knew how to navigate the complex world of money and property. On the surface, he was a family man married with children, respected in his community, and building what appeared to be a solid foundation for his future. But as we've seen time and again, appearances can be deceiving. Beneath this respectable exterior, rumors began to swirl. Some said Morgan was more than just a businessman. He was a key player in a much darker world. It was whispered that he had ties to organized crime, perhaps even laundering money for the Mafia. Others suggested that his involvement in secretive financial dealings put him in direct contact with dangerous people, people who might have wanted him to keep quiet about what he knew. Whatever the truth was, one thing is clear. Charles Morgan was living in two worlds, and that duality would soon lead him down a path he could never escape. In March of 1977, Charles Morgan's life took a dark and unexpected turn. One morning, he left his home like any other day, but this time he didn't return. His family, worried and confused, had no idea what could have happened to him. For 3 agonizing days, there was no word, no sign, just an eerie silence surrounding his disappearance. Then, just as mysteriously as he had vanished, Charles Morgan returned. But he was not the same man who had left. When he walked through the door, he was visibly shaken, his clothes disheveled, and his body marked by something far more sinister. Morgan's throat had been chemically burned, an injury so severe that it made speaking nearly impossible. He claimed that he had been kidnapped and tortured by unknown assailants, people who didn't just want him silenced, but wanted to ensure he would never speak again. When pressed for more details, Morgan's response was chillingly vague. He refused to elaborate on who had taken him or what they wanted, saying only that he was involved in something so dangerous, revealing more would put his family's lives at risk. He was cryptic, guarded, and deeply afraid. It wasn't just fear of the people who had done this to him. It was fear of what he knew, something far bigger than anyone around him could imagine. This was no ordinary disappearance. Charles Morgan's return wasn't just about surviving an abduction. It was about the secret world he had stumbled into, a world that was now closing in on him. After his mysterious return, Charles Morgan's behavior grew even more erratic, and so did his claims. In the days following his disappearance, Morgan confided in his wife that he was more than just a real estate investor. According to him, he had been working as an undercover agent for the federal government, involved in highly secretive operations. He hinted that his work was connected to dangerous people, the kind of individuals you don't cross without serious consequences. Morgan's words were cryptic, and he never fully explained what these operations were. He told his wife that he couldn't give her the full details, not because he didn't want to, but because revealing too much could place their entire family in grave danger. His story was vague, but one thing was clear. He was deeply afraid of what he knew, and afraid of the people who might come after him. But was Morgan telling the truth? Could he really have been a secret agent, or was this just a smokescreen to cover up something darker? Some might argue that his claims sound too far fetched, like the desperate invention of a man caught in a dangerous web of crime and deceit. But then, if this was all a lie, why would he be so terrified? Why would he go to such lengths to protect his family? Whatever the reality behind his words, Morgan's claims placed him in an incredibly precarious position. If he was telling the truth, he had enemies far more powerful than anyone could have imagined. If he wasn't, then he might have been involved in something equally dangerous, something that could have led to his eventual death. Either way, his story raises more questions than answers, pulling us deeper into the mystery surrounding his life. Just a few months after Charles Morgan's harrowing return from his first disappearance, the unthinkable happened again. One morning in June of 1977, Morgan vanished without a trace for a second time. Only this time, the outcome was far more grim. For 9 agonizing days, his family waited, hoping that, like before, he would return with more cryptic words and fearful warnings. But this time, there would be no return. Instead, on a scorching day in the Arizona desert, Charles Morgan's lifeless body was discovered. The circumstances of his death were as baffling as they were disturbing. He had been shot in the back of the head with his own gun, a .357 Magnum. The position of the wound, however, raised immediate red flags. How could someone shoot themselves in the back of the head and it still be ruled as suicide? Even more perplexing was the fact that despite the clear signs of foul play, the authorities quickly ruled his death as a suicide. Investigators pointed to the gun found near his body, along with the absence of immediate evidence of a struggle. But anyone who took even a cursory glance at the scene knew that this was no ordinary suicide. The method, the placement of the wound, it simply didn't add up. Yet, despite these glaring contradictions, the official ruling remained. A successful businessman involved in secretive dealings and wild claims of government work had supposedly taken his own life. But the details surrounding his death were anything but ordinary. Charles Morgan's second disappearance ended not with answers, but with more questions that to this day have never been fully resolved. As if Charles Morgan's death wasn't strange enough, the discovery of his body was accompanied by a collection of bizarre and cryptic clues that only deepened the mystery. Investigators found a $2 bill pinned inside his underwear, an odd detail that would spark endless speculation. On the bill itself were handwritten notes, scrawled in Morgan's own handwriting. These notes weren't just random scribbles, they included a series of strange codes, symbols, and references that no one could immediately decipher. One of the notes on the $2 bill referenced the biblical passages of Ecclesiastes 12, a passage that speaks of the return of the dust to the earth and the spirit to God. Alongside these biblical references, there were a series of letters that seemed to correspond to roads or locations, though no map could ever make sense of them. These notes were not the only coded messages found. Additional cryptic notes were discovered among his belongings, as if he had been leaving a trail of breadcrumbs to something far more sinister. But what was the meaning behind these clues? Were they messages to his family, a final attempt to reveal the dangers he had been caught up in? Or were they deliberately left behind to confuse investigators and lead them down a path of misdirection? The $2 bill, with its cryptic messages and odd placement, became a central piece of the puzzle, but it offered more questions than answers. Investigators were baffled. With no clear interpretation of these codes, they struggled to make sense of what they were looking at. Every clue seemed to point to something larger, a conspiracy that was just out of reach, something that Charles Morgan might have been desperately trying to reveal before his untimely death. The frustration of the investigation only grew as these bizarre elements fueled endless conspiracy theories and led to more dead ends. What these clues meant and why they were left in such a specific and puzzling manner remains one of the most confounding aspects of the case. It was as if Charles Morgan had left behind a puzzle, one that, to this day, no one has fully solved. Not long after Charles Morgan's death, the mystery took an even darker, more unsettling turn. Ruth Morgan, Charles' widow, received an unexpected phone call from a woman whose voice she didn't recognize. The caller introduced herself as someone who had been involved with Charles, but her connection to him went far beyond personal acquaintance. She claimed to know secrets that could explain why Charles had been killed. According to this mysterious woman, Charles Morgan had been involved in illegal activities far more dangerous than anyone had previously suspected. She spoke of money laundering, not for low level criminals, but for high level government officials and organized crime syndicates. The woman insisted that Charles had been deeply entangled in a network of financial crime and that his death wasn't just the result of random violence. He had been murdered, she said, to keep him quiet, silenced before he could expose the powerful people he had crossed. This cryptic phone call threw Ruth into a whirlwind of suspicion and fear. She had always known that Charles was involved in something dangerous, but this call confirmed her worst fears. The woman on the other end of the line seemed to know far too much about Charles' secret life, details that Ruth had never been told directly. Ruth began to question everything. Was her husband really working for the government as he had claimed? Or had he been operating in the shadowy world of organized crime, playing both sides in a deadly game? Ruth's suspicions deepened, especially as the mysterious woman never called back and was never identified. The authorities seemed uninterested in pursuing this lead, brushing it off as a dead end despite the chilling claims. But Ruth couldn't let go of the idea that her husband's death was not a simple case of suicide. There were too many unanswered questions, too many cryptic clues, and now this disturbing call from a woman who seemed to know more than she should. Was this woman a genuine informant with inside knowledge, or was she part of the conspiracy herself? Whoever she was, her words reignited Ruth's search for the truth, a search that would lead her deeper into the shadows of Charles Morgan's life and the powerful enemies he may have made along the way. As the investigation into Charles Morgan's death stalled, theories began to circulate, each more complex than the last. With every unanswered question, a new possibility emerged, painting a picture of a man caught in the crosshairs of powerful forces that may have had every reason to silence him. Let's break down the most compelling theories, each offering a different explanation for what really happened to Charles Morgan. One of the most prevalent theories is that Charles Morgan was deeply involved in money laundering operations for the Mafia. As a real estate investor and money handler, Morgan had the perfect cover to move large sums of money discreetly. Tucson in the 1970s was a hotspot for organized crime, with mafia operations flourishing in the Southwest. Some believe Morgan was working as a cleaner, helping launder illicit profits through complex real estate deals. The idea that he may have been moving mafia money makes sense, considering the immense fear he seemed to harbor after his first disappearance. His reluctance to speak about what had happened to him may not have been because of secret government work, but rather fear of retribution from the mob. If he had crossed someone in these circles, or if he had tried to pull out of the operation, he would have been seen as a liability, a loose end that needed tying up. What strengthens this theory is the cryptic note found with his body, which contained biblical references and coded messages. Some suggest these codes might have been used to communicate within criminal organizations, further fueling the theory that the mafia had its hand in his death. But if this theory is true, it leaves us with another question. Why leave behind such strange clues at the scene? Was this meant to send a message, or were these codes intended for someone else, someone who would understand their meaning? The second theory takes us deeper into the shadows, with the idea that Charles Morgan wasn't just involved in illegal activities for organized crime, but that he was also a player in a much larger game, a government conspiracy. Remember his claim that he had been working as an undercover agent. While it sounded far-fetched to many, some believe there could have been a kernel of truth to this. According to this theory, Morgan had stumbled upon something massive, possibly related to gold smuggling operations that involved high-level officials. Arizona was a key state in gold smuggling activities at the time, with links to international players and potentially corrupt government agents. If Morgan had indeed been laundering money for these operations, or if he had knowledge of illegal gold smuggling, he may have become a target once he realized the magnitude of what he was involved in. Supporters of this theory point to the fact that Morgan's death was ruled a suicide despite the odd details surrounding it, like the gunshot wound to the back of the head. Some believe this was a deliberate cover-up, orchestrated by those in power who wanted to sweep the real story under the rug. The FBI's involvement after his death and their failure to publicly acknowledge what they had uncovered only adds fuel to the fire. Was Morgan silenced by the very people he was supposedly working for? And if so, what secrets did he take to the grave? Then there's the third theory, that Charles Morgan was neither an innocent government agent nor a mafia middleman, but someone caught between both worlds. This theory suggests that Morgan was a man playing both sides, trying to protect himself while digging deeper into dangerous circles. But in doing so, he crossed too many powerful people, leading to a carefully orchestrated murder. Those who support this theory believe that Morgan was set up. His death was made to look like a suicide to prevent further investigation, but the clues left behind, like the $2 bill and coded messages, were planted to confuse investigators. His killers wanted the world to think that his death was a puzzle no one could solve, muddying the waters with a mixture of real and false evidence. The cryptic clues could have been deliberately planted to create an air of mystery, diverting attention from the true motive. It's possible that those responsible for his death knew that creating a strange and confusing crime scene would lead to endless speculation, ensuring the real story remained hidden. Was this a case of professional killers staging a perfect murder? And if so, who stood to gain the most from his silence? Each of these theories has its merits, and each raises critical questions. Was Charles Morgan a man who knew too much, caught in a deadly game between organized crime and government corruption? Or was he a victim of forces beyond his control, silenced before he could reveal the truth? As we dive deeper into his life and death, the puzzle only grows more complex, and the line between fact and conspiracy becomes ever harder to distinguish. As Charles Morgan's death became a highly publicized mystery, it wasn't long before the FBI got involved. Given the strange circumstances of his death, from the cryptic notes to the rumors of mafia involvement and possible government ties, the case had all the hallmarks of something bigger than a local investigation could handle. But despite the FBI's involvement, the case remains as murky today as it was back in 1977. When the FBI took over, they started with the bizarre clues left at the scene of Morgan's death. The $2 bill, the coded notes, and the biblical references all pointed to something significant, but the meaning behind them remained elusive. Investigators combed through Morgan's financial records, hoping to find a connection between him and illegal activity, whether it was tied to organized crime, money laundering, or even government secrets. But despite these efforts, the investigation hit a brick wall. Several leads seemed promising at first. There were reports of Charles Morgan meeting with shadowy figures before his death, whispers of his involvement in gold smuggling, and allegations that he was working as an informant for the government. But none of these leads ever led to concrete answers. The coded messages found with his body were analyzed by experts, but even they couldn't crack the full meaning behind them. Each time investigators thought they were closing in on a breakthrough, they found themselves right back where they started. One of the most frustrating aspects of the case was the overwhelming lack of physical evidence linking anyone to Morgan's death. Despite the oddities surrounding the crime scene, there were no clear suspects, no fingerprints, and no solid proof that pointed to foul play, at least none that could hold up in court. The gun found near Morgan's body was his own, and the initial ruling of suicide seemed, at least to local authorities, the simplest explanation. But as more eyes scrutinized the details, the suicide ruling felt more like a convenient conclusion rather than a well supported one. As the years passed, the investigation grew colder. Key pieces of evidence remained unexplained, and many of the individuals suspected of having knowledge of the case either disappeared or refused to cooperate. The mysterious phone call made to Ruth Morgan by the unidentified woman was never traced, and no further calls or contact from her were ever made. It seemed as though anyone who knew the truth had no intention of stepping forward. The FBI, despite their resources and expertise, was unable to make a definitive connection between Morgan's death and the larger conspiracy theories that surrounded him. Whether they were stonewalled by powerful forces or simply faced a case too strange to crack, the investigation gradually lost momentum. Officially, the case went cold. To this day, Charles Morgan's death remains unsolved, an enigma wrapped in layers of secrecy, cryptic codes, and unanswered questions. Investigators and conspiracy theorists alike are still haunted by the dead ends and loose threads that refuse to tie together. What did Charles Morgan know that made him such a threat? And why, despite the FBI's involvement, has the truth remained buried for so long? With each passing year, the possibility of uncovering the truth about Charles Morgan's death seems to fade. Yet the case continues to captivate those who stumble upon it, a chilling reminder of how easily the lines between crime, conspiracy, and reality can blur. Decades have passed since Charles Morgan's body was discovered in the Arizona desert, yet his death continues to haunt those who stumble upon the case. True crime enthusiasts and conspiracy theorists alike are drawn to the story of a successful businessman whose life unraveled in such a mysterious, almost cinematic way. But what is it about this case that refuses to let go? For one, the sheer strangeness of the circumstances makes it unforgettable. Morgan's first disappearance, his return with a chemically burned throat, his cryptic claims of being a secret agent, all of it paints a picture that's too bizarre to ignore. And then, of course, there's the tragic second disappearance, the body found in the desert, and the baffling clues like the $2 bill and coded messages. These are the kind of details that stay with you, nagging at the back of your mind, forcing you to wonder what really happened to Charles Morgan. The legacy of this case lies in its unanswered questions. Was Morgan a man who found himself caught between criminal forces he couldn't control? Did he know too much about money laundering operations for the Mafia or even high level government officials? Or was he truly involved in something even bigger, something that involved secret gold smuggling, a government cover up, and powerful people who would stop at nothing to protect their interests? There's also the possibility that Charles Morgan was a man trapped by his own secrets, caught up in a dangerous game that ultimately cost him his life. Could his cryptic claims of working for the government have been part of a delusion, or were they part of an elaborate scheme he didn't fully understand until it was too late? And yet, for all the theories, for all the speculation, no one has been able to definitively answer these questions. The FBI couldn't crack the case, and those who might have known the truth have either disappeared or remained silent. The mystery of Charles Morgan's life and death remains unsolved, leaving us with only fragments of a story that feels too complex to ever fully piece together. As we wrap up this investigation, I leave you with a question. Was Charles Morgan simply a man in over his head, tangled in a web of criminal connections and dangerous secrets? Or was there something far more sinister at play, something that goes deeper than any of us could imagine? It's a question we may never truly answer, but one thing is certain. Charles Morgan's death will continue to intrigue, disturb, and provoke speculation for years to come. Because in the world of true crime, the most haunting mysteries are the ones that leave us with more questions than answers.